Well, this is called Regenerative Realities, Permaculture for a Thriving Planet. It was really meant to introduce people to permaculture, give them a few different examples of how it can be applied to landscapes, to our structures, to our social systems, which seems very pertinent for your guys' project relative to all that you are taking on and all that you guys are already about and want to become. So, first and foremost, who is this guy? What is my story? I started my career in teaching. I really wanted to make a difference and change the world, that whole feel good thing that many teachers go after. However, when I got to the education system, I was like, okay, are we really preparing kids for life? Are we preparing ourselves for a better world tomorrow? And I didn't really believe so. I felt like we all are aware of all sorts of issues globally and locally, and yet we are not given in our education system the inklings or the basics for how to be actually act on them and towards them to making our world a better place, to making sure that we live on this planet in a way that we're proud of. So I had to leave the education system. And I got into, voila, permaculture. It was exactly what I was looking for. It was, how do you grow food? How do you build homes? How do you create community? And that's the basics of life, in my opinion. I feel like school system should have prepared us for life. So it's coming back to those roots of what is education about that really got me into it. So I went and did a 2-week permaculture course. That's where most people begin, and that just dipped my toes into it. And really, it's all can. You're talking about life design. You're talking the encompassing of many other fields, but giving a holistic lens for how to combine them in a way so you have solutions that are integrative and holistic. So I ended up going to Australia to go deeper, so to say, and did a 10-week internship down there with a guy named Jeff Lawton, and then stayed in Australia for a full year, working on various home builds, farms, community setups. Loved it. It was an amazing experience. I called it like Life University. But I came back home to Canada being like, great, I have all this experience in the subtropics, and I live in a temperate climate, Canada. So I went across Canada for a whole year doing the exact same thing, this time with a more professional focus, doing consulting, teaching, but still going and learning from others and seeing how they set up their systems, their communities, their homes. I got chances to work on earth ships, straw bale homes, tiny homes, yurts, cooperatives, community living situations. There were so many cool things that I got a chance to be a part of. I came back home from that and didn't get the chance to really start up my business because I got an opportunity to go to Barbados, and there I helped start a school for permaculture. Ended up training over 100 people on the island, working in the Ministry of Agriculture, getting UN funding. It was just an amazing project. That finally led me home. And then I built my tiny house. You see in the background there. I'm sitting up in one of the lofts inside of it right now, and it is my virtual background as well. I teach lots of courses on tiny homes specifically. I always say that it's like sneaking permaculture in, kind of like zucchini into chocolate cake. People come wanting to learn a specific topic, whether it's food forestry or gardening or rainwater harvesting or tiny homes. And then I open their mind to all the opportunities of how that one field relates to all the others and how you can integrate them. This other picture you see here is a food forest I designed in city land in the city of St. Albert. One of my first big community installs that I took the project all the way through from inception through to design. And then we, over the course of, I think, 8 blitzes with the public, we built an entirely public edible landscape on a shoestring budget. Again, the various projects I've been a part of, I'm very proud of the various ones that have been all about community. Did a talk for the city of Edmonton as well. Anyways, enough about me. Let's get going here. Just wanted to ground you into a little bit of who I am, and you can get a little bit of sense of my passion and some of the things that I've been involved in. So for those who are kind of going, okay, well, permaculture, great. I may have a rough idea, maybe have a good idea of what that all entails. I want to just touch on this because um, a good way to start this conversation is why. What is the need and what is the call to action? Why would we need this holistic body of knowledge? And I like grounding this very much, not in woo-wooiness, not in feel goods, but in very much the scientific lens that permaculture leans on. That's what I like about permaculture, by the way. It's a very scientific movement. It's not about belief. It's not about politics. It's hard sciences. It's watersheds. It's soils and microbes. It's species and energetic transactions that are measurable. So I like to come back to that scientific grounding in terms of explaining the why of permaculture. If you look in a biology textbook and you open it up, it'll summarize all the relationships between two living organisms into three categories. The first category is about mutualism or symbiosis, sorry, where you get these two organisms that are in this beneficial relationship and they both like it. So in this example with the bee and a flower, there's an energetic transaction that's happening between these two and they co-evolve continually and improve each other's lives. There's another category called mutualism, and this is where one organism gets a clear benefit, such as a bird and a tree, and the other one seems to get relatively, arguably no maybe benefit. Now, what's interesting about this is if you challenge a biologist to give you a good example of mutualism, they're very hard pressed. Because once you look at the transactions that happen between organisms, they either fall into parasitism or that symbiosis, like the bee and the flower. So in this example, you might say, oh, the bird gets a house, the bird gets food, the bird gets shelter, the bird gets all of these great things. What does the tree get? Well, the tree might get one, a bird that, actually attacks it, get bugs inside of it, and it's a negative thing. Or maybe that actually rids the tree of those bugs on the inside of its bark. And those bugs are the parasite. So again, there's an energetic transaction there, which is either slightly towards negative or positive. And every time that bird takes off and lands, it often excretes and it drops fertilizer to the root zone of that tree. So again, I think it's really hard to find examples of this mutualistic category. And of course, a parasite. And this is where one organism gets a clear negative and one gets a clear positive. Now, this is, with that all said, right? There's no refuting this. You can classify all organisms on the planet within this three types of relationships. This begs us to challenge and ask ourselves, if the planet is one organism and humans are the other, which category are we in? And people don't like this question because we've been inundated with the examples about how humans are wrecking the planet, and we are not given the means to change that relationship. It is not commonly accessible. The average person has a very hard time actually quantifying this and being able to say, yeah, I'm for sure in that example, like the bee and the flower. So that is the why of permaculture, is it gives us the tools, it gives us the design lens, it gives us the hope to be able to go, okay, I can take action and I have these measurable ways of doing it, and I want to leave the kitchen better than I found it, so to say. Now, if I had more time, I'd go into more history. I don't want to go too deep here, but if I've caught your interest, there's a whole history of permaculture and how it began. I just want to say one thing about it, and then we'll move on to the next thing. And that is that permaculture really began honoring indigenous wisdom. And I think that's really important because while it's a scientific movement and science, people have been living on this planet for a long time. And if they did not honor their local systems and be in that first type of relationship, like the bee and the flower, those cultures and civilizations crashed. They disappeared. And we can learn from that. And that's exactly what started the movement of permaculture, is this man that you see here, Bill Mollison, basically wrote a book called Permaculture 1, which compiled techniques for how people grew food around the world in ways that were sustainable. And the book took off. And that was the beginnings of permaculture. At that time in history, permaculture meant permanence in agriculture. But then as it grew as a movement, we quickly saw this is more than just agriculture. This is how we build our homes and position our homes in our landscapes. It's how we relate to each other. And it became system design, whether that's a food system, or it's a home system, or it's a social system. You can apply the same truths, apply these same kind of methodologies to any system to make it better. So permanence in culture is what permaculture now is kind of a combination of. Now, let's give you a little quick definition. If you look it up, there's lots of definitions out there. I like this one personally. It's my own kind of Frankenstein version, compiling various definitions that I found. Permaculture is a design science. I've already explained to you why it's so important. We honor it as a science. It needs to be irrefutable, repeatable, provable. It's guided by ethics. This is really important, that we aren't just using this and not having some backbone that shows us how to move forward. So the three ethics of permaculture are earth care, people care, and then fair share, or return of surplus. And they essence of that is it's a corollary. If you look after the earth first, then it can look after people. If you try to look after people first, you can actually short circuit it and not look after the earth. And in the long haul, you're not looking after people. And you can see that example with like pesticides and herbicides. We can spray things on the earth to increase the yield of that land for this generation, but the next generation now has cancer. So you're not really looking after the earth or people when you follow this mentality out of order. And then the third thing that is, what is permaculture? It's inspired by nature. That nature is an ultimate designer. It's got trillions of experiments of how to design systems. Really, we live within a universe, which is a system, right? And we live on a planetary system with a system. We live within a weather system. We are a respiratory system, a circulatory system, a digestive system. And that digestive system has little microbes in it that are systems unto themselves. You can better believe that we can learn a few things about how those systems work and function well and apply it to our homes, to our lands. A classic example of this would be a food forest. One of the pinnacles, I think, of permaculture design to the land is we can take a look at how a forest evolves naturally. Most landscapes want to be forest. And we can go, hey, I want to copy that structure and process, but I want to substitute the species for food-bearing ones. And now instead of forcing evolution, you're encouraging it, nudging it, and speeding it up, but it wants to become what you want it to become. Instead of modern agriculture, which is about stripping a land down to its bare basics, killing everything on it, starting a monoculture, which would be never found in nature. And therefore, we have built work in. So we can be inspired by nature, by how we design our systems. This is for meeting our human needs. We must be real about this. We need food. We need things. It's fine and dandy to have biodiversity and heal the earth. But at the end of the day, people need to eat. People need to have their needs met. And if this system doesn't do that well, this then becomes a choice of luxury and not a choice for the everyday people. But we must benefit the environment in doing it. So there you go. That's my good combination Frankenstein definition of permaculture. Design science that's guided by ethics, inspired by nature, for me, the needs of humanity to the benefit of the environment. Okay, so let's now show you how to become a permaculture designer. So I always teach people that there's 3 core concepts to applying permaculture to a landscape: sectors, zones, and then relationships, the power of placing things. First and foremost, sectors. These are the natural flows of energy on a landscape. The sun, the water, the wind. If you do not work with these, you're working against them, and work is a failure of design. Work is a feedback loop. Why are we working so hard? We need to change that. If you're working with the sun, for example, you can heat a house passively. If you're working with the sun, strategically, you can help cool a house. But if we place our houses wherever we want on the landscape and stick windows on whatever side of the house we feel like, and don't place things around the house to help shade it, whether it's directly over a window or a tree, then we are not working with sectors. And I don't care about the solar panels on the roof yet and getting to all talking about gray water harvesting and all that stuff. We didn't work with the larger flow of energy first. It will not be efficient. It will be more work. It will need more input. It will not be comfortable. And in the times of crisis, we'll find that our homes aren't actually very good at being homes because they're unsustainable. Zones is the human flows of energy on a landscape. So we have to first work with nature, but then we might as well get some feng shui in. Let's make this easy on us. Let's concentrate our energy strategically so we're not wasting energy all over our property. And there are classic examples of way people do this wrong. A good example of this is the kitchen. If you talk to someone who's designed a kitchen or been in numerous kitchens, or you talk to a head chef, they will tell you about the strategy and structure of how you make a good kitchen. Your stove, your fridge, and your sink should be equidistant to each other because you need to go between those things over and over and over again. I want you to imagine putting your sink upstairs, your fridge on the main floor, and your oven in the basement. How much would you cook? And yet, when we look at our landscapes, have we done differently? Where's our compost? Where's our garden? Where's our rain tank? Those 3 should almost all be on top of each other. Because if you're growing food, you need those 3 things to connect to each other. The water for the garden, the water for the compost. The stuff from the garden goes into the compost. The stuff from your kitchen should be at a close proximity to the door to go into the compost. If you put your garden far away, yeah, you just built work in. Now you're not going to enjoy it. You put that compost far away, you're not going to manage it right. It's going to smell bad. Last but not least is relationships. How do we strategically place things for those benefits to each other? So a compost in the middle of a garden is different than a compost outside a garden. A rain tank on a certain side of the house has a different relationship to the sun. Do you want hot water or cold water? Do you want that water to hold heat and be a part of a greenhouse? Do you want that water to hold heat and have things that trellis up it so that they're frost resistant? Do you want to have the three sisters planting combination of, peas glowing up the corn with squash going across the ground, and you get three crops and you get a place of one? We can place things strategically together so that they're better. But we must first do it from sectors to zones, then to placement. If we do it out of order, it doesn't work. You can put your marigolds with your tomatoes and go, I got a great combo. Yeah, if you didn't put it relative to the sun, your tomatoes aren't growing. And if it's too far away, you're not going to be managing it. Kind of mentioned this already, but I'll just give you some visuals. So here is a good picture which shows what a lot of Canada has, I guess, for relative kind of sun. It's actually a little more extreme for a good deal of Canada. But if you're really close to the border, states, it's fairly close to this. Every degree of latitude has a different diagram for showing how the sun moves across the sky through the year. But you can see how that there is very important. That right there dictates and informs where we place things like trees, like our tomatoes, like the awnings over our windows, or our windows themselves, or the house and the landscape. It all interacts with the sun, and it all needs or wants or does not want the sun's energy. So we need to strategically accept it and strategically reject it. So here's an example. Awnings on a house, south-facing windows. Those specific awnings, though, they're sized so that that sun is at its higher angle, that sunlight cannot enter the windows and cook the house. But when the sun is lower during the cold time of the year, that sunlight can come past that awning into the windows and heat the house passively. This is everywhere in the world's got different strategies for how to do this. So here's a picture of the tropics. If you lived at the equator, this is what your sunlight looks like through the year. And that would totally determine how you position shade strategically to accept or reject that. By the way, I said this presentation, I made it specifically for Costa Rica when I was there. So there's a few more tropical examples in here. Or a roll breeze over them. I don't think most of us are in the tropics here. Here's another picture, though, for our climate. So if you live in North America, we predominantly have a cold wind that comes from the northwest. Now, yes, mountain ranges change how that more air flows. So high rises, trees, but there's many things that change. You got to stick your finger up in the air while it's wet and know which way the wind is coming. You can look at your local airport. You can get a weather station. You can get a weather vane. But at the end of the day, there is a cold direction that the wind comes from, and it only makes sense to block that wind before it hits your home. So this is the design and basics of shelter belts. And you see them in agriculture all the time to stop wind from carrying away topsoils, but you also will strategically see it around those same farmers' homes because they've got big open fields and the wind can pick up and then hit their house and then wick away their heat. So yeah, we can strategically place trees to relate to the wind, to block it before it hits our home and makes it cold. In tropics, same idea. Be strategic about that sun angle. Now, the last big sector, so I said wind, or the sun, wind, and water. Water is the one that we get the most control over in a way. It's hard to control the wind. You can put up blocks. It's hard, you can't control the sun. You can just put up things to reject it. But water's the one that's the most exciting. And this is one of the areas of specialty that I really help clients with, is I teach them how to survey, and I propose a watershed design idea. A way that we can harmonize our roadways with our waterways, capture and store water higher up in a landscape, and put it to productive use. There are so many ways we can use water, whether that's hydro power, whether that's for irrigation, whether that's for safety, whether that's for recreation, whether that's just for life itself. Water is meant to be in flow and slowly moving through a system. But we've designed our landscapes so that it sheds water quickly. We've cleared the land. We've made hard pavement surfaces. And we've done a lot of it irregardless of how the water actually will flow. So, for example, we put roads up areas and then they wash out. Well, that wasn't really smart. We could have designed that property first around how the water would flow, then around the roads that would go in so that they last a long time and need less maintenance, and then strategically place structures on that landscape. Where most people do the completely ass backwards. They go, I want a house here, and then I need to get a road to it, and then they think about water. How do I get water to it and from it? It's completely backwards. A good way to rephrase how we think about water is like a marble maze. You know, these mazes where you drop at the top and it goes around, takes this long circuit. That's our opportunity that we can do as designers. We can make water take that long, slow path and slow it, store it, and soak it into the land and into surface storages and into hard storage like tanks. And then that water is there for us to have as a resource. Here's an example of one applied to a landscape where we have chained ponds connected by swales so that this entire property is now drought-proof, fireproof, and green and productive. Jeff Lawton, the guy that I went to Australia, he's got 13 ponds on 66 acres. And it's the only thing green in that entire landscape. And they get worse droughts than we do. Zones. Permaculture divides up zones into 5 categories. Zone 0, inside the house. Some people even say inside your head. That's a whole other conversation. Zone 1 is immediately outside your front door. This is where you put the things you need to interact with the most frequently, the things that are going to need care and attention, and honestly can provide for most of your needs. A well-designed homestead or property can meet most of the people's needs inside of it, that zone 0 within zone 1. It is possible to do, and it's been proven over and over and over again. But people often want to push further afield, and then their zone 1 is not optimized, and they waste a lot of energy going out to zone 2, 3, 4, and 5 before they have their home base truly secured. Zone 2, just things you interact with less frequently. So maybe you put your bees here. Maybe this is a market garden versus, zone 1 would be more like the micro garden or the multi-graft fruit tree or compost. Chickens going to zone 1. Zone 3 is more like last area you intensively manage. So maybe that's an orchard system. Zone 4 you'll go to only frequently. So maybe it's pasture for animals, maybe it's foraging, maybe it's a woodlot and you go there twice a year. And then zone 5 is that last area that you say, nature, you're perfect the way you are. We need you for rest, relaxation, and inspiration. And we need to leave places that are untouched by our human hands. And it is a good call to action for every property owner to make sure they have a zone 5 on their property. Because if we don't make these spaces, they disappear. Relationships. This is where the magic, the bee's knees is, in my opinion, of permaculture. It's how do we start designing all of these things? And this is where a lot of permaculture techniques shine. However, I've always stressed this. It's not about these magic solutions, whether it's a hugelkultur or a swale or a herb spiral. These are just techniques, and they have strategic relationships built into them. And if you understand the relationships, you can build something similar without using that name. Focus on the function, not the form. So relationships, normally in a workshop, I'll break this down, but again, we're a small group and we're just plowing through, so we're not going to really do it. But you quickly see here, there's different needs and yields to a chicken. And when we start mapping these needs and yields of the things we want to have in our landscape, we then have opportunities to put them to productive use. So most people look at a chicken, they go, oh, great, meat and eggs. Wow, what a reductive way to look at this animal. That's like looking at you and say, great, you're a computer programmer. That's all you are. That's all you're good for. Get out of here. Right? A chicken can scratch. A chicken can entertain. A chicken shits, and it's a good because it's fertilizer. And as soon as we go, hey, there's all of these things that come out of this animal and that can be used for, we can strategically place it in the landscape with other things to have that benefit. So for example, a chicken tractor. The idea that you can have a chicken coop that's mobile, that has access to the ground, And the chicken's behavior now of scratching, which normally makes a large dead area in a chicken coop, can be used to de-weed, de-seed, fertilize, and aerate a piece of ground before you turn it into a garden. They're a hardworking animal. Let them work for you instead of destroy a little piece of land. Joel Salatin, famous farmer in the States, he does this en masse. He first has a rotational pasture system, so he calls himself a grass farmer. Then he brings in the cows. The cows eat it down. He moves them on to the next one. He waits a couple days, and then he brings in the chickens. And now there's all these maggots in all the cow patties. And the chickens run around and get themselves some high fat, high protein feed for free. Spread out the manure. And now where he says he's a grass farmer, he's actually got 3 crops. He's making the landscape better just farming grass. But he's got 2 products of animals on top of it. Now, there's so many examples of this. And again, I have this presentation a little more geared towards tropics, but it still applies for us in terms of how do we place things strategically. Like solar panels, for example. They could be placed strategically for more than just producing sunlight. That's a very reductive way to look at them. They produce a very nice, clean surface that you can capture rainwater off of. Why wouldn't we? They produce shade. Why aren't we putting them over our seating areas or above our windows? They're a perfect awning. Food and strategic placements as well. You can put a growing bed on the edge of your window, and the wind passing in evapotranspirates water from the plants and actually is natural air conditioning. Or using plants strategically as awnings over windows, where you just put up the trellis system, and now instead of heating your house with the sunlight that you don't want in there at that time of the year, you actually are producing food and cooling the house at the same time. So it's all about comboing here. Okay, so there you go. There's the 3 core principles of permaculture landscape design. I could talk all day on these different examples. I could show you pictures of my tiny house and how I designed it to have permaculture in mind. I'll just quickly mention how I did it a couple ways. First of all, I built water into my house, which is thermal mass, so it assists with the heating and cooling of my house. Over 2,000 liters of water inside the house. I strategically placed my HRV, which actually dries my dishes. By putting a dish rack next to the fan, I get rid of that moisture, so it's not on my windows inside my house. It gets pulled out instead, and I get dry dishes for free. There's ways you can place things in your house strategically. Outdoor class example. This is a schoolyard that I designed for a Waldorf school in Edmonton. We made an outdoor classroom patio space with a herb spa in the middle. It has a sundial going through the middle. Got sponsorship to help with the build. Built it with my students through one of my permaculture courses that I taught. And here it is, getting close to finished. After the kids have already started planting in the garden beds. They wouldn't wait till it was done. Okay, and there's another example. It's a social one. I won't touch on that because I want to leave some time for questions. Just as a little subtle plug, shameless plug. I've been teaching now for, 12 years, feels like. And one of the things I noticed is that people lack community. They lack a central place to gather and be supported as they take on this journey. And permaculture courses are great places to start, but terrible places to finish. Because you just learn enough about life to know that you know nothing at all. And then you got all these ideas, but you go, how do I do it? Where's my people? How do I get the support I need? So that's literally why I made Attainable Sustainable Academy. And that's where I teach a lot of my courses from. I do consulting and travel around the world, helping people start their homesteads, their properties, their communities. But this is where my passion is obviously teaching, as you can tell from my passion, and helping other people take charge of their own lives and be their own designers. So I'll end it with that and open up the floor for questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kenton. That's beautiful. Really appreciate it. Lots of little details there that I'd never heard about before, for sure. Yeah, Brett, Mark, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask Kenton when we have him here?
Yeah, sure. I'll start off. You can hear me good?
Yeah, again.
This was a excellent presentation, my friend. I was almost thinking if you had some kind of ESP, were you reading my mind because you're talking about stuff I already knew, but not presented in a nice, simple way, if I can put it that way. Like I took this course of the off-grid thing with Rock Creek.
Shelby and Jamie.
And somehow, not only in their course, there was so much fantastic stuff, but I guess it goes back to when COVID started. Everything went to heck. I was already retired. I started taking courses on the stock market, forex, mycology, and then from LinkedIn, I got into all these different subjects, and one of them was we can't do shit if the soil isn't right. So
Yeah.
all the stuff you're talking about in terms of sustenance, what we need to eat, we're not talking about the animal side, the plants, everything, the forest, and if the soil isn't right, we're screwed. And then we get into monoculture. What a freaking disaster. Then, I mean, we could have a whole evening here. We'd need drinks, of course, to carry on. But now what I'm thinking is there's limitations, of course, in all these things. We can have the ideas. We're limited by the topography, the weather, so on and so forth. For example, in Cooper Creek, from what I've seen, we can't just go out and grow stuff. I mean, we're in, there's forests, there's this and that. So we probably have to do stuff on raised beds or do a lot of indoor growing, right? Now, on the outside, there's many things you can do. I don't see, I'm not the specialist. Someone like you would already know these things. Or to plant strawberries, blueberries, stuff that grow in the wild. Uh, I want to throw this at you. I'm very, very big on hemp, not only on the medicinal side, but on the plant side. What hemp does all over the world, just planted there, in terms of sequestering CO2, in terms of being food for the animals, seeds for humans, clothing. I mean, we all know that. I mean, there's thousands of uses. How to incorporate hemp in the property we have, in the forest all over. I love that. Like hemp is my magic plant. I mean, there's a lot of other plants I like, but it's just absolutely amazing plant. Then
Totally. I think a good way to look at that, by the way, is it's a fast carbon pathway. Many plants are that. We talk about depleted soils. We need to
yes,
encourage the regeneration of soil. And I go back to
yes,
that water plan because if you have water, there you can have life. And where you have
yes,
life, you can strategically put the things that do really good at making life, and you can farm it, so to say. So if it's farming carbon to build soil, to leap the evolutionary cycle of that landscape forward by 100 years, that's what we do. But I don't think we have to do it in greenhouses, and we don't have to only do it in those
okay,
raised garden beds to do that. But we do have to start with honoring, there's a natural evolution to
yes,
any landscape, and we have to bring water in to make it enable itself.
of course, of course, of course. And
Yeah.
I'll also throw in, you're talking about composting. I've been looking at biochar and trying to understand all this. There's some wonderful stuff out there. So, yeah, that's all I can say. And you threw in a few things that I might not have been aware of. Now, the parts where you said using the solar panels, I've seen some amazing stuff, like obviously in all over the world, where they've used it in big fields, and they figured out, yes, the shade part, the animals do something underneath there. There's certain plants that can grow underneath there. Why do you stick it on freaking roofs? That you've limited the use of these things, right? And
Yeah.
and then yeah, the most important thing is the water, the watershed, creating areas of retaining the water, protecting against fire, all these wonderful things. The chickens, the guy who invented the things that roll along. I mean, of course, we're into this commercial thing. Like they put millions of chickens in a thing and then just lay eggs, which is not only cruel, by the way, but anyways, chickens are
Yeah.
amazing animals. And like you said, we need their shit.
Quite literally. Well,
And then
Mark, if you
I'll just throw one more thing. I like the idea of having sheep or goats
yeah,
because they are fantastic lawnmowers, as long
yeah.
as it's controlled, of course, right?
I'd lean towards sheep over the goats if I were you, just
Yeah.
because like a little escape artist.
All right, I'm done.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Mark. Yeah. Brett, did you have any questions?
Okay, just unmuted myself. Great.
Okay.
Okay, I'll put I'll put three questions there for you, Kenton. And thank you for the presentation. You taught me You taught me everything about that. I didn't know anything about that before, so that was great.
Awesome.
Okay, so my three questions are, is there a professional association of permaculture experts? And my second question is, do you recommend any like online permaculture communities who share a lot of information? And my third question is, what do you think about micro hydro on little creeks and little rivers and stuff like that? Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. So, first question. We go back. The first question was about online communities, or the second one?
Oh, the
There's
first
a
question.
Permaculture Association.
Right. So, there is one thing I love about permaculture movement is it's open source. So after you do a 2-week permaculture course, you are allowed to call yourself a permaculture designer and start creating systems and teach it if you want to. That's allowed it to move across the world really fast. It's in every country in the world now. There's schools for it. It's been taken up at universities in certain places. So there are all sorts of little hotbeds, but it has lacked a certain cohesiveness and structure for, I think, certification of authority. There are a couple organizations all the same that have tried. So I got my teacher accreditation through the Permaculture Research Institute of Australia, which is one of the first ones that Jeff Lawton was a part of. But there are a few now all over the place. So you kind of just gotta do some picking. I think there's a university in the States that has an accredited program as well, which is a little more, official. Second is where are people gathering online? So again, like I said, I have my academy. We're actually already did our first cohort program at 35 people, and they already are all chatting and sharing their property progress through the online program. So that's awesome. There are others, of course, that you don't even need to pay for. Like mine, I'm very much giving all the offering and the teachings and the community support and the unlimited Q&A and all that stuff to me. But there are lots you can still get into to dip your toes in. So one of them is permies.com. That's a pretty good one. That's got some forums built into it, some good resources, good community. Reddit is another good place to go to in terms of just having that niching, whether you're talking homesteading or off-grid living or permaculture. They're all pretty good. Those are probably the top two that I'd say. But
one that I like is onecommunityglobal.org. I just kind of posted in the chat. It's kind of like
perfect.
this huge open source conversation of resources of permaculture and energy systems and design and just absolutely everything, and like probably way too comprehensive of an index, but it's still good to reflect on.
Yeah. And then your last question about hydro, absolutely. There are many complications to it, but there are many ways to do it as well. So some people do it with, as long as there's good intention and you know why there's rules sometimes that are there to stop you. There are people who know how to work around those rules and not cause the damage, why those rules are there in the first place. So I have a client, for example, who I built, helped them build a basically what's called a dam, but they did it in a place and in a way that doesn't require them to have a permit. Now, I can never tell you who that client is and where they are, but at the end of the day, as long as you know what you're building and how to build it safely. And regarding getting it out of a creek, absolutely, you need to understand a little bit the basics of how micro hydro works, but you can have a penstock and siphon water up higher. What's really important is that when after it hits that turbine, is it returns back to the original water source, and that you're not taking from that water bed or water stream, so that if there's migratory creatures, you don't want to ever run it dry, right? So it is about ethics again. Remember, looking after the earth, so look after people first. Try to look after people before looking after land. You don't look after the people. So there are caveats and rules and tips and tricks we can go into, but absolutely you can tie into creeks and streams and have small micro hydro. Often for there are some pretty cheap systems out there, little units that you just have to make sure that they're sheltered, and you can generate electrical power off a couple feet of drop, depending on how much power you need.
Yeah, that's awesome. We just had the Kootenay Resilience Festival Energy Expo. We had all of the bioregional energy experts come down and speak to us on Saturday. So I just kind of posted a link to the chat if you want to watch that. Everything solar, micro hydro, wind, geothermal, biomass was pretty comprehensive. And yeah, we're looking at a turbulence system up at Cooper Creek right now, which is quite unique. And local electrician Jaden Woodland is next, becoming an expert with the system. Yeah, so there's lots of opportunity.
Very
Yeah,
cool. Very cool.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'll end off with just a little bit of explanation. I know Jean-Marc, you and I have talked about this, but for anyone interested, just like how normally I help clients. So usually what I do is I do a consultation that could range anywhere from 2 to 7 days. I don't find most people need more than that, depending on what they want to tackle. But I always like bringing that educational element, even if it's to one person or it's a small group. So I've done it before where I've taught a family and friends. I've had other ones where they've had a family potluck or a community potluck. And as a part of me coming in and giving the design, I also gave a workshop more like akin to what you just experienced. And then design solutions on the ground. So what are my recommendations about how to make the most of that landscape relative to your priorities? So that's a huge part of when I come in and help a client is I go, what do you want and why? And how do we really drill down to that? Because if you don't ask those critical questions and clarify, you get a landscape perfect for someone else, not for you. So whether it's recreation or whether it's finances or whether it's abundance or biodiversity or food security or there's a dozen reasons why someone would want to have a landscape, permaculture applied to a landscape. But which one's number one? Which one's number two? Which one's number three? And getting clarity on that is so important first and foremost. So that's a huge part of my services. The X part is surveying, as I mentioned. So I like teaching people how to read the land, how to put in earthworks, because it's not rocket science. It really isn't. But there's ways that we can take subtle and sometimes big, because we can bring an excavator in. But there's ways that we can change a landscape with our human energy in even a day-long workshop with a group of people that will improve that landscape for generations to come. So I really believe in empowering people with that and teaching them the basics of how do you survey, how do you do earthworks and create the most of the water and land, and then create a design around that water. Yeah, that's a quick gist of it.
That's fantastic. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Kenton, for being part of tonight's show. And yeah, I'm going to send this recording out to the masses on the World Wide Web and to our group here. So really appreciate it. Yeah, we will be in touch.
Sounds good, and my pleasure. I'm gonna go get me some dinner now.
Okay, take care now.
Okay, take care.
Thank you.